Hey guys, I wanted to make a video about Jordan Peterson today, and basically I want to address Jordan Peterson hate on the internet. Um, you see a lot of memes and criticisms of Jordan Peterson, and criticisms are all fine and dandy, but I think a lot of it is kind of based in hatred, and I want to sort of talk about that. Um, so, Jordan Peterson, I think, I want to say he's made a great impact on my life, but truthfully, I had to sort of do work on my end to sort of um, gather what he's offering. There's a part on my end, it's not a sort of thing where he's like some servant and is to provide me some radical utility, just by turning on a lecture of his. No. I have watched his videos for a number of years now, and I still watch his videos, and I still really like Jordan Peterson. And I believe a lot of the hate you see online, a lot of the things you see online are pretty much people that don't really understand him and his work, and really it's a lot of people who are disgruntled because he's not like a savior. I think that's really kind of what it gets to. People find the advice of cleaning your room and going on an all meat diet. People take actual high offense to those tidbits of advice. A lot of people don't want advice these days, and a lot of people will find advice insulting. The thing is that those bits of advice, like clean your room and like his diet of where he doesn't eat any sugar, he doesn't eat any processed food, he's eliminated all the harmful foods really, and he just eats meat. And um yeah, and that's pretty much what he does now. And 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 a lot of people who've done that say positive things about it, and a lot of people find that unbelievable. A lot of people, they say it's unscientific, that it's a harmful diet to follow. It's dangerous advice. I've heard many epithets levied, judgments, uh, libel against Jordan Peterson and his daughter. I know someone who called Michaela Peterson a fascist, someone in my family, and this person hasn't I know they haven't really sat down to watch their videos. They just got that um they got that opinion probably off of some article, social media. Michaela Peterson is a fascist, all these people are fascists, and they run with it. And that's what they wager on, that's their strategy. um that's sort of the thing you see these days, like on Reddit. um you see memes. I've seen memes that mock Jordan Peterson, and um there's been news about there's been health updates on him as of recently. He's been, I guess, dealing with pneumonia, neurological damage from benzodiazepine withdrawal from years ago, even though he stopped using it for a number of years now. And you don't see you see people who have no hesitation in uh, levying their comments and just making comments about. People will say Jordan Peterson is a fraud. I've heard a lot of things about him, okay? And I even heard him get people say he's a grifter, he's a Nazi, he's far right, he's he's part of the red pill, he's part of the maybe they consider him a MAGA influencer, or like red pill, manosphere, whatever, incel, guru. And the thing about that actually is that Jordan Peterson was probably one of the greatest. His sort of his message was probably a lot of what Jordan put out into the world was one of the greatest. I don't really quite know how to say it, but it's almost like one of the greatest attempts at an antidote. One of the greatest attempts for an antidote of inceldom, basically incel culture, and just toxic masculinity, and lack of masculinity, or lack of just morality and character in general in people, basically moral decay and rot in society. And those might sound like buzzwords or dog whistles, but I really do think that the advice of cleaning your room, just very simple fatherly advice, is it's not just fatherly advice either. A lot of the advice that he gives is actually not rudimentary, as people make it out to be. When he's talking about cleaning your room, he's talking about facing your problems in life, facing chaos, facing the unknown. He's talking about how problems inevitably crop up in life, and it's part of life. It's there's always another challenge that presents itself, and many people right now, they're just surrounded by difficulties. Some people are buried in a mess, and it's like, how do you make your way out of that? And when people reduce the advice, or lack an understanding of the full message, and only speak about, how clean your room, like that doesn't really land well with people, because it might seem obvious, yeah, clean your room, but there's going to be, if you've ever been in a hoarder's home, that advice to clean your room is, some people face a lot of difficulty with even some of the most simplest tasks, like cleaning a room. And cleaning your room is not always a simple task. Cleaning your room is like, it's like trying to remove a tick from a dog. It might not be an easy thing, and the whole organism of the household can be moved by a single task like that. It's not just a mere locality of what you might think the problem is. Sometimes the problem is connected. I growing up, my father, he was and still is a hoarder, and I remember one time I went to go, while living with him, I went to go do the dishes. Like, finally, like, I'll just do it myself. That was the mentality I had. Like, I'll go do it myself. So I got sort of puffed up. I went to go do it. But then you go to the sink, there's no dish soap. And if there was any dish soap, it's a very trace amount, or maybe it's watered down, you know, and and just not sufficient really for actually doing dishes. It wasn't like just let's imagine, there's no dish soap, because I've seen this at my grandma's house as well. There's no dish soap. It's just a little bit at the very bottom or whatever, and you run out immediately. We've all seen that. People try to water it down, try to make it last. And so you try to do dishes, there's no dish soap. So that problem, as simple as it may seem, clean your room. It's made apparent in some sort of way that the problem is actually more difficult than what was previously conceived of being. And so back then I just gave up, and that's what a lot of people do. But the advice that Jordan Peterson gave, it made me realize that it's not merely just cleaning your room. It's facing the problems necessary in order to clean your room. So it's like, maybe to clean your room, you have to first do laundry. You have to even just get up, and I've had times in my life where things were easier and more difficult, and some people, they might be able to just throw everything in a basket, go do the laundry, clean everything up. But other time, I've had times where I've had to just fixate on the task to try to make progress. You might have to look at your laundry and just almost stare at it or think about it, and you have to think about, okay, how are you gonna work up the energy to put things in a basket and to do the whole process, and sometimes, even small things like that can be like a goal. And that's one thing he talks about, is sometimes goals can also be very small goals, and sometimes small goals are actually almost like daunting and big, like getting up in the morning and doing laundry, doing dishes, making yourself breakfast, and preparing for something, maybe like getting exercise, just whatever it may be, and that sort of plan, it's like a schematic, and sometimes all it takes is one little wrench in that schematic, and then your day is halted, and your progress is sort of, your plan isn't unfolding how you wanted it to. And so, this is a thing where, sometimes like I said, a little problem can make itself out to be a much greater problem. And that's one thing I've realized, is like, something, a lot of our culture these days is like, it talks about like incel culture, and how despicable it is that people don't have girlfriends and get married and just whip themselves into shape and being a man and all that kind of stuff. And I've sort of realized that I think the problem is actually much bigger than a lot of us have realized. Um, and it's I really don't like blaming things, but we gotta at least recognize the challenges and the obstacles. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of things, um, I guess, causing inceldom, and just sort of basically like society, I think, is sick for the most part. And I think a lot of people are very ill. I think people are their health is not top notch, you know. Even like in high school or and young ages. I see more and more people being crippled pretty much, having some sort of handicap. You know, you go to you if you see some of these college kids, you I know that like the culture in like say the Vietnam era, of masculinity and just even hippie culture is like, I think people were much healthier back then. And now, the younger kids are, I think, going through more and more disability, and like I believe rates of autism are going up. Not saying autism is like a disability, but it can be, I think. And um it and I guess what I mean is like there's sort of, so I've thought about this, there's there's cultures that when they undergo a famine, each generation progressively will have like lower bone density, shrinking of the brain size. People will lose height, things like this, and and I think that's pretty much what's happening today. I think that society has been the cocktail that everyone undergoes of, it starts with vaccines. It might seem very marginal, a vaccine. It's just a little dose of something. But you have a bunch of vaccines when you're born. The medications people take, the over-the-counter medications. Uh, you have, cold medicine. You have aspirin. You have ibuprofen. You have all these different things that people are taking casually. At any sign of just uncomfort or discomfort, people have a headache, you pop a pill, and it's over the counter, so it's accessible, it's cheap, and so forth. And then you have medications. Uh, People are given medications in high school and in college. ADD, ADHD meds. And then you have psychiatric drugs, uh, SSRIs, so forth. Then you have the diet, which is lacking in nutrition. Maybe on paper it's a nutritionally complete diet, but it's not high quality. It's not actually, it might, I've seen a lot of things criticizing diet, and sometimes people might supplement and do everything, but their health is still not great, and and so it's like they may be presenting signs of B12 deficiency, but they get to the point where they escalate to doing B12 injections, but it still doesn't seem to help, that kind of thing. And I think it really matters if the nutrition is bioavailable. And I think animal-based diet is just a carnivore diet, meat-only diet is gonna do a whole lot to try to address the nutrition issue. And I think the nutrition of kids these days specifically, and even adults, is very lacking. People are consuming just ready to eat packaged foods. Kids are given processed foods. They don't have a real breakfast. They're just given breakfast cereal. And they don't really get animal-based nutrition. They're not getting the bioavailable B12. They're not getting the heme iron. You see anemia rates are really high right now. It's like, I think it's at least 1 in 4 women have anemia or something crazy like that. You see vitamin deficiencies. You see people are deficient in vitamin D, magnesium and zinc, I believe, and all these different micronutrients and minerals. People are just deficient of all across the board, and you don't have to hear it from someone who's done the carnivore diet to hear this sort of stuff. You'll hear, like, Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She's been saying this for years, and she's one of my favorite people for nutrition advice. She doesn't even do the carnivore diet, but she talks a lot about vitamin deficiencies and how serious they are. That, you might think, oh, vitamin whatever, it's not gonna change my life, but the thing is that some vitamin deficiencies, like even fish oil supplementation and vitamin D, and its effect on Alzheimer's and heart disease and things like that, it's very significant, honestly. Just a daily multivitamin and things like that, they're very important. The thing is I do a meat only diet now, so I don't supplement, because I think meat provides all the necessary nutrients. But I still acknowledge that vitamin deficiencies are a serious problem, and they're a chronic issue in the United States and just in the world in general, and it affects cognitive function, behavior. So basically, and then there's pollution. So there's noise pollution. It affects people's well-being when people are in the cities, and versus when they're more in rural areas or more in nature, like when people go for a run in the city versus in a forest. People report higher levels of well-being and lower levels of well-being in the city, whereas the higher is in nature. Just things like that. This industrialization, not to go, like, I think Ted Kaczynski went too far, the Unabomber, and ultimately pathologizing industrialization. I think that's too much. I want to pathologize it completely, but I think there is something about industrialization and a lot of the pollution with microplastics and PFAS and forever chemicals and like noise pollution and all these different things affecting people's health, the environment we live in today is a very new environment. There's a lot of new challenges, and the culture with technology, things are just so different that I don't think, I wouldn't call it hopeless, but I think the problem is greater than people appreciate. And so I think that things like incel culture, I think the fix isn't really as straightforward, I think, because I think generally people, there's so much dysfunction in the world today that relationships are largely dysfunctional, and a lot of them are, there's a lot of disunity in relationships. A lot of people split up. There's a very sort of casual polygamist culture these days, chronic monogamy, hookup culture. You have things like OnlyFans and online porn and things like that, and so the environment is, like I said, it's so different these days that the hurdles that people have to go through just to sort of not only get into a relationship but to maintain it. I think there's just a general misalignment in a lot of people in society. And not to say I'm perfectly aligned, because I often am not, and it's I think just the misalignment in general. Okay, so in Nazi Germany, that's the most blatant example that everyone can get around. I could also talk about the Soviet Union as well, or different tyrannies. But in Nazi Germany, that was a society that everyone was pretty much going astray. There's very few exceptions. And there's unity in sort of a downward trajectory. And you could even consider that solidarity. And so I think that society has that proclivity, or that capacity, to go sideways. And I think that's actually happening. I think it really is happening. And so I just think that things like postmodernism and just basically postmodernism is a really good, I think it's a basically like the death of God that Nietzsche talked about. And what he talked about was the death of cultural values, the death of, he was talking about the rise of postmodernism, where it's this rise of rejection of ideals, rejection of ideas, rejection of values. It's sort of this really strong skepticism against values. And so, like, meta narratives, explanations, religious ideas, and even story ideas, like morality, like the moral of the story and things like that. There's a skepticism around things like that I think ultimately rejects truth in a way, or at least claims that it doesn't exist, or at least that, like, one thing that is true about postmodernism is the idea that, there is no finite truth. And I believe that because I think there's always more truth. And I think that's where the postmodernist idea differs, because it posits that individual truths are basically it claims that there's so many different interpretations of something that there is no real interpretation of something. And that I fundamentally disagree with, because I think you can understand things. I think you can I think things can be intelligible, and I think that you can derive meaning from things. And so values, like virtues, like honesty and truth, even love, I think a lot of these values have been met with very very high levels of scrutiny and basic rejection, in a way that I think that's sort of what happened. I think the sort of rejection of those values is what led to the rise of tyrannies in the 20th century. Like, I think people became dishonest, and people were not truthful, and I think truth was a very controversial thing in those societies. And it's pretty much like the ideology of the state, say communism, or even like Nazism. They were seen as these finite ideas, or like ideologies, and that everything outside of them was condemned. And that condemning, I think, is part of this sort of postmodern, that condemnation, I think it is kind of has a postmodern flair to it, where it's this sort of abandonment of outside ideas and higher truths. And postmodernism doesn't exactly reject higher truths, but it makes a claim that they're ultimately unintelligible, or that people aren't able to really understand higher truths. And I completely disagree with that. I think that I think outside ideas are quintessential to just functioning in general, and to it's like a software update on your phone. You want to keep your phone updated to keep it relevant and functional. And so and I see that very much so with ideas. And I think the issue with totalitarian states is that they often exclude ideas, and they label outside ideas as dissent. And I think that blindness eventually leads to the collapse of the state, because there is no rejuvenation. There is no there is no fountain of youth for the state. There's no revivifying ideas. There's the novel. It's a drought of novelty, and the conformity of the conformity really the conformity to the set ideas within the state is I think in a lot of ways coerced or imposed and forced on people. Like there's it's when things are ruled through power and not mutual agreement or consent, really. That kind of thing. It's not voluntary. It's not willful voluntary participation. It's more like coerced participation. Often people are threatened to lie and things like that. And so I want to address the I guess the issue that I think is going on in society right now. And I think that there's a culture of dishonesty in a way. And I think there's sort of a culture of tyranny occurring right now. And it's not really a tyranny of the state, but it's more so the tyranny of the people within the state, of its citizens, of the collective. I think collectivism, or pretty much like moving as a collective, I think is very dangerous, because it's kind of like the idea of democracy. Like, well, if everyone is moving in one direction, how could it be wrong? Well, the thing is it can be wrong, and it can be really wrong. And collectivization can come with collective peril, collective movement. I think collectivization is actually not the accurate word. That pertains to taking from the rich and giving back to the poor, or yeah. So, but what I really mean is just like hive mind, groupthink, that kind of thing. And I think there is a lot of hive mind, groupthink right now. And I think it's a lack of individuality, because the lack of individuality is actually the lack of personal responsibility, because it's more so an attempt to blame the group if anything goes wrong, rather than blaming yourself if something goes wrong. Like you're just following the commands of the group, basically. It's kind of you're following the motions of the group, and that's the excuse. And I think that's what's going on these days. And so yeah, I think it's rare. I think it's rare to find someone who sort of breaks the cookie cutter mold in a tyrannical state. And so in a tyrannical state, everything is pretty much dysfunctional. Since everything is grounded on lies, nothing is really reliable in a way, And I think that I think there is a hint of, I think that is sort of happening. I think people are coerced into falsities, and And so all of these things, the environmental issues that people are going through from how they're raised in the diet and all the medications and so on, and then the tyrannical aspect as well, where there's dishonesty, lack of truth, uh, and the postmodernism of pretty much like ignorance as a belief system in a way, like the rejection of ideas and insight really, and labeling outside, pretty much labeling the unknown as a pretty much like dissent, outside ideas as dissent. And so I think I want to make this video as long as I can make it today. So you have this conformity that's coerced to on top of things, where people are acting in a way that is inauthentic to sort of appease tyrants. And so you have people living in very inauthentic ways, and the value systems are very scrambled in a way. Like, people, I think, often don't have like their idea of right and wrong is very scrambled in a way. And so it's like, who's to say what's right and wrong, that kind of thing. And so I think people are losing sort of a sense of discernment as well. It's like it's all these factors of sort of a descent into unconsciousness. That's what I really think it is too. It's a descent into ignorance and unconsciousness, because maybe life is seen as too much to bear. So people just go along with the herd because they don't want to step out of line, because when you step out of line and you can be faced with great punitive action, honestly, and a lot of people are not willing to go through that. During Nazi Germany, you can do your research on this. There's a lot of officers, people, I think in the military as well, that they didn't, in the Nazi regime, who didn't stay in line with the regime. They were nonconformists, and I think some of them, I think were actually like heroes, because they protested against their own government and didn't follow along with the orders. They didn't follow orders, and that is a thing these days, is that people just following orders, and people loathe to step out of line, and they don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, that kind of thing. And really, I mean, there's all sorts of coercive things in a tyrannical society. People, it's like, what's at stake? Do you be the person that goes out and do executions, or do you risk your family, that kind of thing, your partner, yourself. And a lot of people, I think, they wouldn't do that. And a lot of people these days, they claim moral virtue, but I don't know. I really think a lot of these people who claim virtue these days actually don't have any real virtue like that. It's completely unearned. I think that just merely identifying yourself as like the good guys is it's not enough. I think saying you want to kill bad guys is, I think it's actually indicative of psychopathology to say that you want to let off steam on bad people, because it's a vent really, and it's theoretically a socially acceptable way of venting anger and things like that as well. But it really shows this inner psychopath that, and the sadism that people have, and they want to find a criminal as a socially acceptable vent for it, so they don't have to let it out on someone who's innocent, really, and I think that's kind of what it is. And I think people just tolerate it. They don't object to it because you don't want to get in that person's way. That's what it is a lot of times. And I think a lot of the moral virtue that is being claimed these days is completely empty. I think that a lot of the words these days that people use, they don't really know what they mean. They don't really, words are used as a way of just throwing paint on people, and and then that way you can bark at the mob to hunt that person down. I think it's a lot of witch hunting. Witch hunting, on its you lay it out as what it is. Witch hunting, okay. You hate bad people, that's what it is. Okay. Yeah. But the thing is there really weren't any witches. And so, what happened there? And it's this proclivity to witch hunt that I think people, it's kind of, I think there's something sad about it, because it's like the notion of hunting witches is actually like, oh, it's like a heroic thing, but in reality it was actually an atrocity, the Salem witch trials. And really the people who were witch hunters were essentially the villains of that event, of that series of events, of that story. And that's the sad thing about it, is that in trying to wear the clothing of the heroes, they ended up actually being the villains. And it's they don't mind sacrificing innocent people as long as they get to claim the virtue. And I think that's kind of where things are going now, is that I think there's going to be innocent people getting killed just so people can try to claim moral superiority, to show off the scalped foreheads, to the mob, and cheer and chant. And yeah, I think collective movement leads to collective peril. I mean, you see Dresden in World War II and like the fall of Germany and the overkill. I really do. There was overkill in World War II, and there was the people would argue there wasn't enough, but I think the ethnic cleansing of the Germans is a good example. Like Germans, just by descent, were their genetic descent. They were hunted down and killed after World War II, and that was just overkill. I think there's overcorrection, and I think that there's overcorrection today. We haven't seen a lot of the violence get levied yet, but it might come. I think there might be mass civil unrest, and another sort of almost witch hunting thing episode again with this sort of stuff. And the thing is it's like Nazis, they technically exist. Like, I mean, they're very obscure though. They're very, like, a genuine Nazi is like, it's such a rare thing that someone is a self identified Nazi, and that they got the swastika patch on them and things like that. Yeah, you will see it on the news. There'll be like a march or something, but maybe it's like 20 people, and but the thing is like, I don't think 1 million people need to die because of a rare, obscure proportion of people. I think just a lot of the frenzying attitudes of people these days is too much, and it's rationalized with the notion of, well, it's against Nazism. Don't you hate bad guys? Or why are you defending Nazis? That kind of thing. And well, for one, I don't think the Republican Party I don't think they're all Nazis, and I don't think they have to all be killed. And I don't think liberals and Democrats need to be killed either. I don't think we need more mass deaths. I don't think we need more I don't think we need more mass deaths. I don't think we need any more tyranny. I don't think we need any more democide. I don't think we need any more politicide, for that matter. I think I think the way that the justice system operates, it's not perfect, but I think it is largely effective. When you take things by individual basis of crimes. But trying to label a whole group as like they all have to be killed, I just think it's yeah. See, the thing is like in Nazi Germany, there were people who were more or less corrigible, which means that there are people who were more easily corrected than others. So as corrupt as Nazi Germany is, there are people in it that once they learned about the atrocities and once they learned everything about everything that went on, they were like, they switched sides pretty much, and they changed, literally. And I think that's what we need, really, is that sort of change. And it's like, a lot of those people that change, they can actually end up being good people. They can be great assets. And and it's when people are able to admit to wrongs and atrocities and things like that that I think makes them redeemable. And I think it's when they really acknowledge it too, and are able to look at it, that makes them redeemable and respectable. Um, and and I guess that's what I want from people. I the thing is that, there's also the other end that are incorrigible, who have a blind allegiance to their group and their state, their identity, their nationalism, and their group think, and collectivization or collectivism, and so they end up going down with the burning ship, and they don't admit to any wrongs, and they swear allegiance and that kind of thing. And those people end up not making it through the trials, and they end up not getting they end up not getting introduced into society, they don't reintegrate back into society, or integrate into society. And so there's that. And so I guess I'd just like to see more of that. There's is it Daryl Dixon? I gotta look his name up a sec. It's Daryl Davis. If you look up Daryl Davis, he's gotten a lot of people from the Ku Klux Klan to give up their robes, to leave the cult. And I think that's what I want to do. I want to get people to leave the cult. And there's going to be people that are more or less corrigible. And the thing is if I myself were in a cult, I want to leave it. That's the thing too, is like, I don't want to stay stuck to ideological allegiance or anything like that. I want to open myself up. I want to be open to greater ideas and greater pathways, and if there's a better way of doing things, let me know. Let me know. And I just want to go with what's best. That's the thing. And I think some people, it's not really about right or wrong or what's best, and it sort of comes down to like what they want. And I don't know. I think people can have their ideas about how things ought to be, and I don't want to really be in opposition to higher powers or to God, and I want to I want to be in the same direction, and and I think there's that oppositional um, energy or force in the world that is almost like shaking its fist at the sky, and some things aren't immediately fixable too, and I think we have to learn to kind of recognize that and not necessarily be content with it, but understand that sometimes things can be a journey, and that getting to where you want to go isn't just always a snap of the fingers, and it can be a journey, a pilgrimage, and that's fine. But I think some people, I think a lot of people, they've kind of given up, and that's when you have like it's one thing to say be it incel or something, but it's a completely another to just give up prospects of ever really becoming the sort of person that could be in a healthy relationship, and or doing away with say women or something like that in general. And I think in the extremes you see women hatred and um, where instead of trying to get along with women, these people are sort of can act in a volatile way, and instead of getting their act together, they instead are they kind of do away with that, and almost it seems like want to regress. And I don't know. I think then you have people that instead of I don't know, I often see a thing too with like personal responsibility and like blame, you know. I mean, there's a whole idea, if if all the women are rejecting you, then maybe it's not all the women, maybe it's you. And and that's something I believe in as well. It's like, if I really was all I could be, I think I would be able to be not only someone that was like desirable, like stable and mature and all these different things, that maybe things would maybe work out, I don't know. And I and it's that sort of stargazing attitude that I think is really beneficial, because I think people just give up hope, and they don't want to go on the journey. But I think the journey is really the thing that makes you feel like you're it's when you make direction, when you make progress towards that goal, that things that's really a point of salience, really, is where you find meaning, is and affirmation a lot of times is like if I making progress Um, and I can even recognize that, maybe it won't even happen in this lifetime, but, I still want to try. And I still want to, I don't know, progress towards that. And but I also recognize that there's almost a refusal of that too, and a lot of people, I think pretty much the thing in society these days is chronic monogamy, and I think people don't really stay true to their words too. Like, people just make promises very casually about, someone, like, being with someone forever, and but then they make that promise again and again and again and so on, and there's no real it's like this unconscious sort of cycle that people are just stepping into. You hear that as one of the greatest fears of people, is that they don't want to end up like their parents or whatever, a certain, and you hear that as a great fear a lot of times with people, is they don't want to end up like their dad or whoever. And so you have people who are doing that, who are just repeating the cycle. They're not breaking the cycle. And there's almost like a contentness with it. Like, there's no real effort to sort of break away, to prevent to prevent ending up there. And a lot of people just take that ride straight into the cycle and just repeat patterns. And I think that's in part like people who don't really wake up. Going back to unconsciousness. And people aren't opening their eyes to see where they are headed and who they're going to end up being in the future. And they're not really willing to look out. It's like, imagine the Titanic and they're just all partying, that kind of thing. And then it just leads to like a catastrophe, really. And I think that's in part willful blindness and unconsciousness. And and it's ironic because I think a lot of those people are also the same to claim moral virtue as well, to say that, to champion themselves as the good guys and so on, or that they really don't like bad guys and blah blah blah. I guess what I want to do is I want to make more of these videos and get to a point where maybe it's like streaming, like get to where I can do live streams and have an audience, a digital live audience. It might be far from now, but whatever. And then I also want to make more lectures or just rants and talks. And I think if I can make them long, I think that will I don't know. I don't want to just fill empty air though, empty space with just filler. So just arbitrarily make something long, like Das Capital. Okay, throwing shade, but okay, whatever. Yeah, but honestly, that is the impression that I got from reading Marx. I haven't finished Das Kapital, but when I tried to read Marx, that I really got the impression that a lot of it was just filler and like words for the sake of words to just try to establish a high page word count. And it feels like the ideology is really like, as far as I understand it, it's like you don't have to really be long-winded about it to really see what it is. I mean, it's really just a call for revolution and to overthrow the billionaire class or whatever, and to establish power for yourself, um, and to pretty much be the ruler. That is what it is. I mean, that's you have nothing to lose but your shackles and everything to gain. It's basically a promise for world domination. It's like an IKEA manual for world domination, to be the ruler. And if only you were the ruler, then things would be perfectly ran. That's the idea. And but I don't know. I think that's very, it seems like a very promising idea to 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 take back power, or however it's said, and then you could just control the world, into however fits, to however pleases you or whatever, and to how you see fit. And I think the idea that like power corrupts is, I think there is something to that once people get into positions of power and authority, that they can command people to do what they want. And that idea that somehow leads to good things, I think is I think it leads to abuse of power. And and it's not desirable, because it's not a plan for longevity. um just pleasure in the here and now. It's not a plan for longevity. It's a plan for controversy. It's a plan for ruining your reputation. It's a plan for cultivating rivals. And there's the idea too that like the Machiavellian idea of like by any means necessary. He also, you know, popularized the idea of like establishing power by any means necessary and defending it by any means necessary. And I think people conflate power with well-being. I don't think power is the same as well-being. I think if anything, like, I don't think Hitler had it good, and I don't think Stalin had it good either. Like, that's how I really feel. I think the Nazis that I think like the powerful elite within the Nazi party who stole paintings and valuables from the Jews and things like that. They and had these lavish parties and all that. Like, I don't think it's anything to envy. I think it was sort of a way of drugging themselves out of the reality of what was going on. I don't think it's enough to sort of alleviate the existential burden of being a tyrant or anything like that. If anything, I think Hitler was under a lot of stress, actually, and he was very volatile emotionally, and I think that it may not be true for all dictator for all dictators, but I I still don't think it's really anything to envy, like power in general, because it's like you just have the worst reputation, and then and you're just trying to protect yourself from people all the time. Um, there's got to be a lot of paranoia associated with that, and and yeah, I don't know. I think that power isn't really a great remedy either in general. I mean, you can compel someone through force to like be in a relationship with you, like, but it's not gonna be real, and uh, and that's gonna be an underlying truth the entire time, and it it just won't be right, you know, and you'll never be able to be content with it. It's gonna and so I mean, there's yeah, I guess there's different strategies for trying to achieve uh, sort of satiety or some level of satisfaction with in life, and I think power is not one of them. Um, like people, I think people fantasize about if they had power and eliminated everyone else, that they would somehow be like at peace or like a ruler or something. And I just think it's an unfeasible plan. And um, and I think like even then it would kind of suck, because it's like you can always just ask yourself the question, like, then what? You know, like, you get global domination, but then what? Uh, you throw a revolution, uh, you get power, then what? You get you get uh everything you demand on a whim. You get all the healthcare. You get all the food you want. You get um, partner selection. You get, it's a really weird position to simply just be demanding to have your whims met like that, and to try to design the perfect way of catering yourself pleasure in a way, or satisfaction, and without merit, really, by simply just through demands. And people would maybe demand that they have no suffering and things like that, and for no difficulties, and for no challenge, and for no obstacles, and no illness, and no no hunger and no poverty and uh no dying and um the thing is like I think struggle is necessary for growth in some ways, in that difficulties are necessary, and that even things like death can give us an appreciation for the time that we do have. Because if you had unlimited time here on Earth, you could just mess around, and then what? It's like there's a certain there's a certain I guess you can almost like try to frame it like a game, and like playing the game correctly versus not playing it correctly. And if you play the game by its rules and you try to do everything right, it's like you can still you might not get the desired outcomes, you might lose still, but I mean you're playing it, you're playing a game and how it's meant to be played. And I think that's usually the more salient way of going about things. You can just mess around and just run around, but you're gonna quickly run into a wall. You're gonna quickly just run into just out of bounds territory, and then you're gonna have to turn around, and it's like you yeah. Meanwhile, there's a whole story that was made for you pretty much to enjoy. Um, I think this is going to be the last time I do a video like this. I think the next video I do, I'm going to try to do it like maybe like an Asmongold sort of style, or like a have sort of content displayed so I can react to things. But yeah, yeah. But I'll end it here. Thank you guys for watching. Peace.